Our next presenter is really going to be covering a relatively new area, but I think not an equally important area. We've talked about procedures on farm, but one thing we haven't covered so much is the people on farm. And so our next speaker is Dr. Mike Chetta with Talent Metrics Consulting. Mike's a managing partner and one of the principal consultants at Talent Metrics Consulting, a boutique human capital management consulting firm that utilizes the science of management to deliver evidence-based insights and interventions that help organizations make better informed decisions about talent selection, management, and organizational culture. He completed his PhD in applied organizational psychology from Hofstra University and a master's in business administration and management from Dowling College. He is also a director of the master's program in industrial organizational psychology at the University of Central Florida. And today he's going to be covering Are Caretakers Motivated to Comply with Biosecurity? What resources are needed? So please welcome Mike.
So I will go quickly into my presentation and actually kind of give you just a little bit of background of what I do on top of what Lisa had said, because I think I'm definitely a unique person here in the room, as it would be. So essentially, as an industrial and organizational psychologist, I come from a background like an experimental psychology and psychometrics background. So looking at creating measures and metrics and applying the scientific method, in this case, to mostly workplace problems centered around employees, looking at worker motivation, looking at worker employee training, leadership, how anything you do that faces employees can impact productivity and outcomes of interest. So I think there's definitely work a lot of white collar industry, but also a lot of manufacturing and power and utility. So there's a lot of parity there. Just kind of go into what we did and how it's kind of an interesting way to look at the swine industry and look at the people who really kind of implement biosecurity and look at what we can do to positively impact their ability to do their work and to then positively impact biosecurity and then outcomes that we're all interested in. So that's me, and then also Josh, who's helping here. He helped with this research as well, which is funded through SHIC, which we really appreciate. And I want to say, Josh, hopefully next year will be up here with me, if that works. And he'll be sharing as well some of the work we do, and get into that at the end. But as long as that works, there's our little blurb. Again, there's a need to look at caretaker motivation. Caretakers are kind of a pivotal point in all of the biosecurity, bioexclusion stuff that gets done. I'm going to make really quick work of this, just because I don't want to bore anyone too much. But if you look, we want to look at the ability of workers and their motivation to execute. The issue is, as we looked, there is no previous research that was done specific to swine industry. We did look also, really nothing in poultry, bovine, anything like that. We know that there's a significant impact if there's an issue with biosecurity and there's outbreaks, and we're relying upon workers. So what a great opportunity for us to apply what we do in industrial and organizational psychology and look at the workforce and gather that information in order to kind of find a pivotal point to action on and have data and evidence and use evidence-based management to actually lead to improvement. Okay, this is going to be quick. I'm not going to, again, try not to bore everybody. There's a couple of tried and true theories in industrial and organizational psychology. There's a theory of planned behavior. There's also the job demands resources model. Essentially, there's this idea that people, we look at motivation. People plan to do things. They may have intentions to do things. There may be other factors in their social group from leadership. Then there's the actual behaviors that they do, and all those are aligned. Just because you have an attitude to do something or towards positively doing something and you have an intention to do it does not mean you're going to do it. There's other things that change how you can actually go from attitude to intention to behavior. And in this case, we looked at the job demands resources model, which kind of notes that there's things that stop people from moving forward. There's job demands, there's lack of resources and things that influence and impede them in accomplishing the things that they set out to do. And I think that kind of resonates with a lot of people. You probably intend to go to work each day and work. Maybe work well, but there's other things that will come in and will stop you from doing that or make it difficult for you to do that. And obviously at the caretaker level, there are things that we want to explore. Here's the fun part. So there's actually a little model. But if we look at, we have desired behaviors on the left, look at people's attitudes, social pressure, and look at even the ease of compliance. Oh, let's just skip again. Here we go. Ease of compliance And all of that is part of the intentions, attitudes, and motivation to do things. Now, on the other hand, then we have the actual resources, which could also involve leadership, access to training, and other things. And then the demands of the job, the hours, getting the work done, logistics, difficulty of working with equipment. There's all kinds of things that can influence that. And obviously, failure at any one of those points can make it really hard to comply with biosecurity, even if the intention is to do so. So our methodology, it's an exploratory study. We conducted, it was a non-probability sample. We had 5 companies who cooperated, and we were able to get access, I'll show you in a moment, to 130 or so caretakers. And we gave them surveys initially. So we had some open responses and also some, they're called Likert scale items, 1 through 5, to just ask them how much they agreed and disagreed with various items that are related to validated inventories for the theory of planned behavior and job demands resources model. So we'll see where we can go for next time, but it was a convenience sample would be the word, and it was a survey research because it's exploratory. So there we go. We had 139 participants, but 132 of them actually completed the full survey and data set. Predominantly English speaking, although a very large portion of Spanish speaking folks. There's the percentages from the companies. The last 2 companies, much smaller initial sample, so we took what we could get. But we definitely have really good participation from a few of the firms, especially given that we're trying to get people to take time to take an online survey and log in. There was compensation though, which is great. But again, getting people to take time, which obviously for caretakers is not going to happen while they're there. It's an after the fact thing. So it's difficult obviously to reach that population while they're working, which we'll talk about very briefly at the end. Average age 40, deviation, so obviously it runs, the age gamut runs all the way from 18 to 76, predominantly male, but a good amount of female as well, mostly white and Caucasian, Hispanic. Again, that kind of aligns with how people took the survey, although it did seem that some of our Spanish-speaking folks did take the survey in English. And I think that was confirmed when we went through some of the open comments and how we had to clean them up and stuff like that. But just to let everybody know, when we do surveys design as a psychometrician, I'm writing things at like a 3rd grade level. So we're writing questions that are very easy to understand, very easy to translate. So there's no nuances or colloquialisms or things like that. Very cognizant of being as clear as possible to gather the data for what we expect it to be. I'm going to ask you a question that when you answer, it's most likely you actually answered my question. I'm saying that now, it's a very convoluted thought, but it's something about sometimes when you ask questions, you might not get the answers because you're using words that don't mean the same things to everyone. So this was part of our issue of using these validated items, very simply worded. So I think it actually was easier for folks who maybe had a rudimentary understanding of English to be able to respond in English. Employment, kind of an equal breakdown. About a 1/3 contracted, a little under a 1/3 directly employed, and then a little over a 1/3 facility owners. Caretaker experience, very, very shocking for me, coming from a lot of utility manufacturing jobs. People have very long tenures. They've been working as caretakers for more than 10 years, or a large portion of them have. And also there was a good amount of people who had 10 years or more of just a general experience at that company. The farms overseen, I'm going to highlight the fact that there was definitely some folks that either responded inappropriately or were management, because people are not overseeing 24 farms if they're a caretaker. But on the average, a little over 2 farms, deviation shows that it was probably between 1 and 4 for most folks. Let's see, and in the case of at the bottom, a lot of them are vaccinating pigs, a lot of them are loading and unloading pigs, and then a slightly smaller percentage from those are responsible for early pig care, but a large portion of our sample are doing all those things, which we're really interested in. They're working about 6 days a week on average, fluctuating mostly between 5 and 7. That's for a majority of the folks. We did get some demographics from a few of those folks that didn't answer all the questions out of our 132 that answered everything and our 139 that participated. They're working about 6 to 8 hours a day, or at least a quarter of them are. A quarter of them are working more than that. And about 70% of them are traveling less than an hour. But if you look at that now, that means that other ones are spending time traveling, and even a few percent are traveling 3 to 5 hours. So when we talk about job demands and resources and things that influence getting the job done, that's something that can come into play too, just so you see the demographics. They're working long hours, they're working 6 or 7 days a week, and they have to travel. That can influence how they do their work. I won't bore anybody too much with that, but we're measuring, for the theory of planned behavior, I said we're looking at attitudes, we're looking at the social norms, that's like the attitudes of the group. We're looking at perceived behavioral control, which is an interesting one, I'll get to a little in a second, that you think you can actually influence how you do your job, that you're not just, automaton task-oriented necessarily. There's the behavioral intentions to actually do things, and then there's the actual behavior as you perceive it. And for job demands, we have the actual demands of what you think needs to be done. We have the resources of what you have to get the job done. There's things like burnout, which relates to exhaustion, and then reported like disengagement from work, which is an important thing to consider, because obviously if you're overworked and under-resourced, it's going to lead to burnout. It's something to, we'll talk about it probably in our future study, but I'll touch on it in a moment. So with all of that said, I'm going to get into some of more of the fun part of this, where I can actually just communicate some of the non-data things to everyone. If we look at the responses for behavior, this is key to our study. So people are saying, I understand the consequences. I adhere to the protocols when I can. Keeping them healthy is important. So this isn't an understanding issue. This isn't most likely a training issue, because they know it's important. They understand that they're motivated to comply. The issue is, I don't want to make more work for myself. They're health challenged anyway. We're doing too much work. There's exceptions. Now you get into the point of, now there's other things that impede me from doing my work. Again, this is a sampling with a lot of open comments, but you get both sides of the coin. I intend to comply, but the reality is complying means more work or more difficulty for me and for my workday. So I'll show you this. Breakdown of the attitudes. I'm rewarded. This is very interesting. I did not expect to see this in Josh. If you look at the items, in this case, unless something's reverse scored, a higher number, closer to 5, means they agree. I'm rewarded, 2.8. That's very low considering where the other scores, where the other items are. So while people understand that there's consequences and I can keep the animal safe and it's important, they go, but I'm not rewarded for doing that. And at a basic psychology level, we all want to be rewarded. We all want to be recognized. This has been for 100 years in psychology. Everything points to this, but they're not getting rewarded. So now my job sometimes is hard and there's other things stopping me from working. And on top of that, if I go above and beyond, or even if I do a good job, I'm not going to get recognized. That will be demotivating. That can demotivate people. That can make it much harder. If it affects the accountability when you're like, well, I don't need to necessarily go and do this because I'm not going to get rewarded. So let me just do my job. And as you saw on that previous slide, doing their job might be looked at differently based on the day and how they feel about what they really need to do to get the job done. And sometimes biosecurity could go by the wayside because adhering to those protocols could slow down work output. I hope that was obvious when I showed some of those little comments. I know what to do, I can do it, but sometimes it's difficult. And in this case, I'm not going to get rewarded anyway. And when I say reward, I don't necessarily mean financial reward, I mean recognition as well. So I just don't want to throw out there, I'm not saying that we need to put, money is not always a reward. There's other ways to recognize people and give them reinforcement, which is also a basic tenet of psychology and research, reinforce positive behaviors. When we go to social norms, which was very interesting to see that supervisors and coworkers, when you look at the ratings, they're relatively similar. So while you would expect that coworkers might not be a tremendous amount of influence, as caretakers are working kind of on their own, at least in some cases, we're seeing the supervisors, it's not as high as we'd like it to see. So we're saying my supervisor spends time with me, they keep us informed. 3.9 and 3.7 are not as high as we'd like them to see. I'd like to see those numbers in the 4. That would make them affirmative, much more of an agree. So now they're somewhere between neither nor or in the middle and agree, which is not great. You understand, like we want to see higher numbers for those, especially when we get to the next slide. You see some of those numbers are high, but in this case, while coworkers are important, social norms are important, supervisors and leadership are very important. That's something that can definitely help convey messages of biosecurity compliance and things like that. As an example of that, there's some little excerpts slightly cleaned up, but at the top one, the first one, I'm frustrated. I don't always know rules when they come out. Sometimes other people don't follow the rules, so they're expressing. And I mean, some of these are redacted or truncated. We did get a lot of open feedback from people to share things. So they're saying, hey, it's very hard. Supervisors aren't telling us stuff. I don't know exactly what's new. So essentially, I'm gonna do my job. But then again, we have others. So obviously, this is a difference in depending on location and company. We have a talk on the topic. I know it's important. There's news online, training. I'm getting training at all times. So that's a big dichotomy to get between people. So some of that is interesting. And also it means that sometimes there's a perception of that too. But it also doesn't mean just because supervisors are training people or mentioning it does not mean, again, that that's going to lead to action or behavior. Because if the supervisor is telling you to do this, but your job demands are high, it's still not going to matter. It's still going to impact compliance. So if we look at the scores, in this case, we're asking them if you agree about the difficulty of these things. So higher numbers, it means it's more of an issue. So as you see on the top, physical workload and demanding contact with livestock were the two highest items. So again, we're getting to the real job demands and the physicality of the work, whereas the work schedule and time pressure and the environment are important, but drastically less than the physical workload and demanding contact with livestock, which again may be an opportunity to action on those things or figure out how to make those easier. And I'm going to leave that very broad, make it easier so that it allows them to do their job and they perceive it as being less taxing. There's some of the items at the bottom. My work does not tax me too much physically. That's a very low score. They're disagreeing. They're like, no, my work does tax me. Taking care of animals is training. And again, we're seeing 2s and 3s. This means these things are very much demands for them. Most supportive, they're saying job control is great. When it comes to doing the tasks of their specific job, they're like, I can do my job the way I need to do it to get it done each day, which is really important. We can get into a long discussion, but we won't. I have a thing called job characteristic theory, but having control over how you do your job makes it easier to do your job. You use less cognitive resources, changes your attitudes and intentions, because you're like, as long as I meet the goal of finishing the task, I have some flexibility in how I get it done. So I don't necessarily need to be very robotic. I have some flexibility. And they're mentioning that supervisor support is important to have that. It's a good thing. So again, we see that they need it, it's important, but that doesn't necessarily even mean everyone's getting it, especially even again, a 3.5 is not as high as I would like to see it. So their support, they say it's important, not necessarily getting it as much as they would like, but it's definitely super duper important if you look at that list. So they're not as worried about job security, they're not as worried about performance feedback, but in the case of rewards, that's a really low number as well. That's the one we keep talking about. I keep going back to rewards. I think if I ask anybody, what's the reward system for being compliant? Yeah, exactly. So that's not helping motivate them, and they're not getting it, but they have the job control and they have the supervisor support, or at least they want the supervisor support, and when they do have it, it's important, but still not as high as we'd like to see. They are saying, though, at the bottom, there's some reverse coded items. Supervisors aren't keeping their distance for a lot of these folks. They are there. I don't know what that support looks like, though, and we're going to dive deeper into that. They are there, they are communicating. I don't know if they're leading, and I don't know if it's being able to offset the job demands and the other things. But now, when we go to the item, so on the bottom, I do not get to decide for myself when I complete my task. They're disagreeing, because again, they have control over their job itself. The item above it, I decide for myself how to manage my workload. They agree, but not very much. There's some opportunity there, and I think it's on the next slide. Go into that. Yeah, I want to kind of look at, let's see, is that the right one? Yes. So participation in decision making, that's a 3. It's right in the middle of the scale. It's kind of ambivalence at its best. They can control their individual job, but in making decisions on how their job fits into the greater day, or how they even do their job on a larger scale, they don't have that input. And I don't think that surprises anybody here. And maybe, again, it's an opportunity for leadership and caretakers to have more partnership. Something that might help them to address this and even alleviate some job demands and things of that like. And rewards, least supportive, 2.79. So that is not, they're not getting that. They're like, I am not rewarded, and I don't get to really participate in larger decision-making outside of my individual role. Items at the bottom that kind of highlight that. And again, my performance at work is not fully recognized and appreciated. Not great. Only management decides what everybody does. Not great. So there's opportunity, and when you look at it as a corpus of data that we've collected, the lower and higher scores, depending on the measure, definitely stand out. So as we get to kind of finalize this, there's a lot here as far as like just our general outcomes. So we have the results say that we don't really have I don't know if we have a compliance issue that's related to motivation. people are motivated to do well. There's everything that happens after that seems to be where we have some work to do. They know it's important, they understand it's important, but now they might not have the knowledge to enact it. There might be outside demands, there might be other things that are stopping them from doing what they need to do. But it's not a motivation issue, which but indirectly means it's not truly a training issue. Not in the purest sense. It seems like people are getting the training. There's other things that we need to work on. Most costly things are job demands, the physical workload, demanding contact with livestock. That's something we have to figure out how to address, and maybe that relates to those scheduling and I have control over decisions. If you interlope those things, maybe that's an opportunity to change the job demands and physical workload, or at least modify it in a way that makes it less of a point of contention for caretakers. For job resources, most supportive, supervisor support, they want that, it's important. They have individual job control, that's good. However, rewards and participation in larger decision making is not there. And those are things, who's gonna help them make decisions and who's gonna help give them rewards? Well, not their coworkers and not themselves, it's supervisors. So now there's a link between those two things. There's an impact of leadership and for supervisors. Motivational drivers, social norms. I think I kind of alluded to that a few times. While there are norms, culture, expectations, it's not as big of an influence based, I guess, on the way that the caretakers work. So that's not as big of a deal. Whereas in a manufacturing setting, when people are working on the line together, or in I do municipality and like power grid work, those people are working hand in hand. The coworkers actually set a lot more of the expectations and the workload. It doesn't work that same way here. Supervisor support, strong job resources. They need that. Some people are getting it, but you saw in the feedback, some people are not. That's definitely impacting their ability to get their work done. Motivational drivers, attitude. I want to do a good job. I know what to do. That's great. That's great that that is not a problem, because that's a much harder issue to address when people don't care to be safe or don't care to do their job. So just to throw out there for people who may be in the room and say, maybe the workers are not motivated, they don't want to do a good, no, they want to do a good job. That was overwhelming that they all know what they should do. The problem is their intentions can't be matched with actual behavior because of all these other things that are impeding it. And then the weakest resource, rewards, which also means recognition. And there's lots of things that have been done in the history of industrial psychology and workplace psychology. All of you have had, and I'm not putting this out there, I'll make a little light of it, but employee of the month and pizza parties, things like that, they're not the greatest thing ever, but they do something. I'm saying there's things along those lines that we can do. Supervisors recognizing people, whether it be at meetings and at trainings, there's things you can do to make people feel like I'm being highlighted for doing a good job, as opposed to I'm only being chastised if I do something wrong. It's basic human psychology again. Everybody wants to be rewarded, recognized, and feel like they're good at their job. We also, with all of this, with our first research, we get to have like a baseline for burnout, which we didn't have before. So now we have some baseline metrics where now when we do a second study, we'll be able to compare that, which I'll talk about in 1 second. So overall, I'll read the first two bullet points because I think this is the most important kind of summary of what we found. The problem, again, with biosecurity compliance is not motivationally driven, or not really the way we initially conceptualized, which is okay. There's strong support that compliance for biosecurity is influenced by job resources, supervisor support as well, and the availability of performance feedback and rewards. Additionally, our analyses suggest that workers are heavily impacted in doing their work by physical workload and demanding contact with animals. Now, whether you knew that before or not, now we actually have the data that supports that, and we can move forward from that. We actually want to keep doing that, which brings me to, we did get a follow-up. We are now going to conduct interviews with caretakers, and we're going to actually do something, the very exciting nerd stuff for me is if we collect a lot of interviews, we'll be able to go do natural language processing, look for semantic analysis, take the corpus of information, build a dictionary, and ask them, of course, in the interviews, we're going to elicit information about supervisors, about job demands, about rewards, and almost let them tell us, well, if this is a demand, what would help you? What would be good for you? If we get dozens and dozens, and maybe even hopefully like 100 people, and at least in the initial study, that's a lot of information. I hope you all realize the difference between survey data and interview data is this. We can pull so much more. I think with that, we will now have some ideas of what type of rewards would be helpful, what supervisors can do to make the job site better, and how they can help lower job demands and how they can give them more resources. Because we'll be hearing it from the people who are doing it. And like I noted, these are people who have been doing, a lot of people have 10 years of experience in a company, 10 years as a caretaker. They have lots to share. They just need the opportunity to do that. And then additionally, we're hoping that we can get some of that information from supervisors as well. And then hopefully we'll be back here next year to share that. But I think that'll actually be where we can action on what we found. And now we know not to necessarily bark up the training tree or the attitude tree, because that's not the issue here. So with that, gotten through. Questions?
Great, thanks, Mike.
Hello.
That's a really very interesting and fascinating field of discovery and research. And so we'll open up the floor for questions.
I'll be here all day. Josh, we'll send my co-investigator over to you.
This was really great, and I've been trying to deal with the issue of people for a long time. You mentioned the language that was third grade language delivered in the survey, but it was not given in Spanish?
No, it was given in Spanish.
So they had the choice, though, to
Yes.
take it in English or Spanish?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
And we have someone, one of my researchers is a native speaker, and we checked that. And then I also, weirdly enough, checked it as well, because I am not a native speaker, but we double checked that, which is also why for our interviews, that same person is going to be employed as we conduct the interviews and then transcribe them from Spanish if necessary.
Yeah, the interviews are going to be really important, because one of the things I would have wanted to catch in the surveys is what day is it today? Was this loadout day? Is it 8 a.m. or is it 4 p.m.?
Yes.
I think Ben, you'll be able to catch that in the interviews.
Yes,
So
yes, I think I was really alluding to that. It's going to be, we plan on devoting a lot of resources to the text analysis, because we're going to be able to pull a lot of crazy stuff. You mentioned the metadata and demographics. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of that, and we'll see if that influences. There'll be some cluster analysis or something that's going to be done with this data. I'm fairly smart, but I also have someone that works with me who's exceptionally intelligent, so we will call through that data and write code and figure out where we see pockets of similarity, or, results are based on morning results seem to be here and afternoon results seem to be here. We'll pull some of that out. So it's going to be a really amazing exploratory study that I also think is going to lead to outcomes, and we'll have evidence for decision making.
Any other questions?
Oh, Josh, get back there.
My exercise today.
Get your steps in.
Enjoy your presentation. Of those different companies that you were interacting with, do any of those have reward systems in place?
So
Or there again, are you going to reach out to then some companies that do have some rewards for their employees?
So we are reaching out to other companies. We're in talks with these same companies. So when we ask those questions, maybe you're not going to be surprised. They're like, no, not really, was the answer we received. And I think it's because there was this perception that rewards can only be monetary, and that's definitely not where we're coming from. So a lot of that was lack of that. But yes, and especially I'm going to put that out there because it seems like that's the pitch at the end of these. If anybody works at a company that would like to participate, we would love to have your partnership to talk to caretakers and gather that information. Or if anybody knows a place that has a company that has a reward system, I'd love to talk to them. I got the feeling from the handful of folks we spoke to that it's not very prevalent, which is disheartening, especially considering what I do outside of the swine industry. We're about motivating employees and rewarding them and reinforcing behaviors that would lead to positive outcomes. And it'd be very hard to do that if we don't have that system in place. So I'm open to anybody reaching out to me. Would love to have that partnership as we go forward with our second study. So.
Great, thanks. Well, please join me in a round of applause for all of our presenters today.